I'm really looking forward to this session of the Zscaler CXO Summit, which of course we're focused on the modern CISO and strategies to reduce risk within an expansive threat landscape. Now, within the session information, we did mention, the recent supply chain attack within the session detail. So the panelists, Ken and Steve and I, are going to start today by looking at how much more due diligence companies are doing for their current and prospective security vendors today versus pre-Sunburst activity in early December. Ken, why don't you go ahead and start us off with your thoughts on that?
Sure. Hi, everybody. Good to be here. It's really an interesting dynamic. There's only so much you can actually truly do when you're dealing with some of these these IT technology supply chain folks. It's not like you can go to Microsoft and say, "Hey, I want to inspect your code," or even Oracle, or any of these major players in the space. You can ask the questions. You can push them for some type of assurances. You can talk about legalese. There's all sorts of things that you can possibly do, but how effective they truly are remains to be seen. So we're doing what we can at this point, which is asking the questions of how are these major suppliers actually securing their code. What are they doing in light of these recent, very significant events that we've seen? And it wasn't just Sunburst, obviously. We've seen a few other, issues, and I expect that we're going to see more. So that's it's challenging. There's no question, and I frankly, I'm still searching for the right answer for that particular question.
Yeah, Steve, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, I agree. I think this is a space that is, for lack of a better term, completely exploratory. We see many of the companies out there just asking questions, some of them incredibly formative, very, very basic. And I think a lot of that stems from the fact of there's an uncertainty. Part of it is the uncertainty of what are you actually providing back to me as a service? And is it something that we could wrap some sort of compliance or a certainty around, if you will? The second of that is I'm not exactly sure how much flow through of risk I'm allowed to ask, right? So I think there's also that kind of, how far can I go in this dialogue and what can I really expect? I certainly can't necessarily demand, here's a full pen test report and how would that look and what are you doing for remediations? I can ask those questions, but you're going to see the general responses of, yes, we do assessments. Yes, we do these pieces. And I think the big unknown here is how are the cyber liability insurance parties going to play in as you watch this explosive growth of ransomware events for this past year. Basically, depending on which study you want to look at, 200% growth, 300%, 180%, but by no means is it the same story as yesterday. And I think the insurance companies who are watching these astronomical claims come in, they're going to be, frankly, steering a lot of the conversation because the companies are going to have to respond to not only what are their limits of liability and their insurance providers, but frankly, these third parties and how does that all play through? And if, this is a fairly small world, if I'm underwriting several different companies, now the insurance company has a different thing to think about as well. So it'll be a dynamic space for a while.
Yeah, Steve, that's an excellent point. In the cyber insurance space is, really getting hit pretty hard, right? And when you go through your renewals, we're expecting to see a 30 to 35% increase in premiums, right, without actually any increase in our coverage. And that's frankly something that we've been told by a number of providers that it's just across the board. And it's not surprising given, again, this huge increase in ransomware. Again, now the uncertainty of supply chain attacks, and that transference of risk is great, but it only gets you so far. And now it's becoming much more expensive to actually do some of those risk transferences. I expect that's going to continue to be the name of the game, and renewals for the foreseeable future are going to continue to rise as we see continued attacks, successful attacks against companies across the globe.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic too, because it really kind of reinforces the notion that, when you take a look specifically at what happened with SolarWinds, trust is the attack surface, right? And when we're doing our internal due diligence from a risk assessment standpoint, maybe those are the things that we're not quite as focused on, because that level of trust is there. And it's like, okay, well, that's not where we need to focus our continuous monitoring efforts. But this incident really, I think, kind of changes and really shapes that dynamic going forward. And then, you both mentioned the cyber liability insurance. In my previous role as the CISO of a global law firm, I was constantly working with our broker to see if we could get the good driver discount due to, an organizational certification like ISO or something along those lines. Yeah, that typically falls on deaf ears, I noticed, even though, it does provide a modicum of information assurance that you have processes in place to manage and mitigate risks that are overseen by executive management. But yeah, ransomware kind of changes that dynamic as well. I remember I was in a discussion. It's like, well, is that under cyber liability insurance or is that under our K&R policy? So those are interesting conversations as well. But, thinking back on that whole notion of trust as the attack surface, as organizations transition to the cloud and the attack surface becomes more dynamic and amorphous, encompassing thousands of applications and services, along with supporting protocols and all the associated APIs, and innocent misconfigurations of cloud services can create instant vulnerability. What projects or initiatives have you undertaken or planned for attack surface management or reduction? Either one of you can take that.
Steve, why don't you go first this time?
All right, sure. So I think the last maybe 2 years, we've really been focused on zero trust. And I think more and more people off the backside of the pandemic are finding themselves in that same exploratory manner. We fortunately started that path a little earlier. I think we reaped the benefits of that during the pandemic. And frankly, we're not satisfied to stop there. And in talking with kind of fellow CISOs, but also what we're doing in our business through mergers and acquisitions, et cetera, I think a lot of people started shifting technology just to survive, for lack of a better term. The cloud transformation was less about transformation and frankly, just get it done. I need to survive as a business and I don't really want to keep doing on-prem. So now is the time to just move things. It didn't mean that you moved it, maybe this is a little too mean, moved it responsibly. So a lot of the people that I'm talking to now are like, ooh, how do I go clean this up after the fact, which is the right answer. But I think that same exploration of I started here and now I have to continue this journey all the way across the board of how do I make it right? How do I either consume the risk, transfer that risk, mitigate it, all the normal risk management style of steps. But frankly, now I'm playing in a landscape from a technology perspective that probably isn't well understood. If a company hadn't already begun its cloud journey, shifting there isn't going to make them suddenly understand it better. So I think finding those right partners, both from a technology as well as a consultancy, and frankly, leaning on your other peers. I think one of the pieces that the good guys have never really done well is talk. The bad guys do that all day long. And that's part of the reason why it's so hard to chase them. It's so hard to stay in front of that game. So I do think opening up, having a little bit more of a trust fabric on the good guy side of the fence really helps accelerate that learning curve. There's no reason for all of us to keep cutting our teeth on the same thing over and over and over again, just because we're afraid to pick up the phone. So that's another piece that we're trying to do is really start establishing some of those core relationships that we feel comfortable talking about. What are the security challenges we're facing? How did we go face those? And frankly, are there third parties who are helping us do that? And if so, cool. How do we explore doing that in the same way? So Ken, what are your thoughts there?
No, great stuff. You covered a lot of ground there. In regards to sharing information, you nailed it. If we're not talking to each other, we're going to fall behind, right? And the bad guys absolutely are sharing techniques and tactics and practices, and we should be as well. And that's really the genesis of the ISACs that are out there. There's an awful lot of information that's shared. Just for an example, in the retail and hospitality ISAC, Everybody went through the same, pandemic transformation that really hit the entire globe. So the ISACs are an absolutely fantastic way to share information about how people are tackling things, and it's wonderful to be able to toss out just a question to a group of hundreds of your peers that you can get either an anonymous question and you can get anonymous answers back, or you can be fully fully out there and share who you are and get more focused answers back. Absolutely spot on. The other transformation, I'll go back to that pandemic transformation model, right? I think every one of us went through, over a year ago now, went through a pretty significant shift in how we do business. And we're never going back. We're not going to go back to the way it was before. The pendulum will swing back, yes, but it's never going to go all the way back, right? It's just not. So now we're dealing with a much more mobile workforce. We're dealing with frankly, a very dynamic attack surface that requires even more management, right? So, and that leads you right back into that whole zero trust architecture. And how do you get to the point where you're treating any endpoint that's connecting to your environment as an untrusted asset until you've properly authorized, authenticated, et cetera. And that's really the direction that we're headed, right? The idea is that we're going to continue to have a highly mobile global workforce, and we need to be able to reduce our attack surface as much as possible. Everybody's like, oh, zero trust, it's going to be the nirvana and the end game. Yeah, I just saw that question pop up about how do you address zero trust in a zero perimeter environment. That's exactly where I'm going. There is no such thing as a perimeter anymore. There's hundreds of or thousands of or tens of thousands of perimeters, because every one of those endpoint devices that's accessed in your environment has its own perimeter. And frankly, even if you have a device on your corporate environment inside your quote unquote trusted perimeter, you really shouldn't be trusting it, right? You should follow the exact same model, that zero trust architecture, so that asset has to be authenticated and authorized. The person using it has to be identified, authenticated, authorized before they're allowed to access a resource. And that access stream should go through something that's doing things like UEBA, network-based malware. I mean, it should be commonplace. That's how you access your applications and your resources. So that's the direction that we're headed. It's not going to be a overnight thing. This is an evolutionary thing versus a revolutionary thing. And that's really because you have, I don't know about you guys, but I know I have a ton of legacy applications out there, including mid-range, mainframe, everything, right? All across the board. And I have hundreds of different locations where these applications are served from. It's all global. I have differing regulatory requirements. So this is not going to be something that we're going to have a complete mapped out vision of how we're going to get from A to Z, right? It's going to be, well, we're going to go from A to 1, then we're going to go to B, then we're going to go to 3. I mean, it's going to be one of those evolving paths on how do we get to a zero trust environment. And it's, frankly, by the time we get there, zero trust may mean something completely different, right? I don't think it truly will mean something different, but how it's implemented may be different than what we perceive as the way to do it now.
Great points there, Ken. And as before I actually joined Zscaler, I was a Zscaler customer in my previous role, and we decided to go down the zero trust route ourselves. Probably later than I would have liked to, because we all know that the zero trust paradigm is nothing new. It's just I regularly say that I felt that maybe a couple years ago the technology space had finally caught up with the theory, right? And seeing how a lot of zero trust solution providers out there were providing their service, being cloud enabled and delivered, it really kind of opened up the idea. But when you get through those early stages of actually implementing a zero trust solution, you quickly find out it's like, okay, wait a minute, I get that part of it. And, we've done some great things, like thinking of it from like a crawl, walk, run model. Like, okay, we've, minimized our attack surface, by getting rid of some of those, externally facing exposures, like, VPN inbound listeners,
VPN,
or whatever.
Citrix farms, yeah, all that crazy
Right.
stuff.
But then when you get to the point where you're like, wait a minute, I need to put together a compendium of all of my authorized users, both internal and external, and what applications they're authorized to have access to. That's a pretty big lift, right? And so I think that, my advice with going through that is don't make it so monolithic, right? It's like, okay, hey, we got to do this all at once. I mean, there very much is that model of maturity that you kind of go through, as you were kind of explaining it there, mapping point A to B and then working your way like that. I can tell you, we went through what I would call a discovery phase, just to identify what kind of applications were under our operational purview. And on a global scale, you'll start finding some really interesting things. I mean, I almost, when I was working closely with Zscaler on this as a customer, I said, you guys have essentially, provided me a capability of internal shadow IT discovery, because we identified multiple file servers that had never shown up on like vulnerability scan reports. You know why? Because they were being managed in an automated manner. They wouldn't show up on anything that we were doing from a risk discovery standpoint. And I mean, that's kind of just an initial value add of looking at something like that. But I'll tell you, the inverse side of it is, when I started gaining that level of visibility, and I'd be interested, to hear what you two have to say on this, was, I started thinking about it. I'm like, wow, I've been, doing this for quite some time. The amount of visibility I have into my business environment today, it makes me think, how long has risk gone unseen, unmanaged, and unmitigated?
So you got to be careful about what you wish for, right? Sometimes you might get it.
Right.
We all wish we understood our entire environment and knew what was in there. And then when you find out, you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't asked that question.
Right.
Exactly.
But
don't ask the question you don't want an answer to. I think that's
right.
The old
that's right. That's right. But you're absolutely spot on, right? And the reality is that no matter how good your asset management is, you're probably not getting everything in your environment. And when you start to expose things and you start to see, those processes, and you start to see things, crazy things going on, like, people using Smartsheet to actually back up a business critical application that's doing some kind of funky, call out to a vendor or something. There's crazy things going on out there. And the reality is that you're also going to discover where you have, 6 different solutions that are doing essentially the same function. But the reason that you've got 6 different solutions is because not a single one of them knew that one of those other people existed. And that's just a small example of some of this stuff that we've discovered with barely looking. And when you really start digging in and you really start getting that visibility of, here's all the functions and applications and systems, et cetera, that's going through your environment, it is absolutely frightening. Especially when you start to, you understand that internal shadow IT includes things like, unsanctioned, unmanaged WhatsApp implementations, and just stuff that you kind of in the back of your head, you're like, I bet there's somebody doing this in my environment, and you go look for it, and lo and behold, you find it. And not only are they using unsanctioned applications that you've got virtually no control over, guess what? They're pushing pretty important data, right? Pretty sensitive data across those applications. And again, it's a matter of what do you do? I mean, how do you rein those things back in? And I go back to that whole evolutionary versus revolutionary, because whenever you start monkeying with business processes and you start changing how people are doing things, you start saying, no, you know what, you need to use this application over here instead of that application. You're moving people's cheese. And if you're moving people's cheese, you better make real certain, absolutely certain that not only is that new cheese taste really good, you get a glass of wine with it too. right? Otherwise, you end up having the villagers come after you with torches and pitchforks. And as soon as that happens, right, the complaints go all the way up the chain, and pretty soon you've got your CEO chewing your ear, going, "Why are you doing this?" So that leans back to, hey, you know, organizational transformation, behavioral and cultural changes have got, absolutely must be supported top down and bottom up, which means that you, again, if you're going to move people's cheese, make sure they understand the new cheese tastes better, and you're going to get a glass of wine with it.
And I think that's an excellent point. If you think of another paradigm right now, the kind of thought process is the most successful CISOs are the best storytellers, because to get that top and the bottom, and frankly, everything in between, all going the same path, you have to be the modern day bard. I have to make the story so interesting and compelling for whatever your slice of life is that you want to come along on that journey. And I think that's an opportunity for us as well from a security practitioner perspective, is to stop thinking about security as a control on what the business is doing, and more of truly, how do I provide a user experience that's better? How do I make that cheese taste better, smell better, look better, feel better, et cetera? Oh yeah, and provide the wine along the way, right? That is exactly where we need to go. Having visibility is nice. We use kind of a 3-tiered paradigm of, I have to see something before I can manage it, and I have to manage it before I can secure it. So see it, manage it, secure it. That's all great. Zscaler does a great job for us in terms of providing, frankly, all three. But the biggest value that I have from, again, that story perspective is visibility. I can go to some parts of the business and say, hey, by the way, those 6 applications that are out there doing the same thing you're doing, how about instead of investing 7 different ways, we just do it 1 or maybe 2, because there might be a legitimate reason, but how do we start bringing business efficiency? And I can tell a very interesting story that way. From an IT operational perspective, how'd you like to reduce, N% of the people that are doing low-level ticket work and have them focus on something else? I think that kind of storytelling is where we need to go. And the only way to do that, well, aside from just being super creative, is to do it with data. And I think Zscaler, having that data, kind of the richness of telemetry in your environment, is super beneficial. Really lets you sit down, approach it from kind of a fact-based story, and invite people along with you. Take away the pain, take away the friction, and so just kind of invite people to come along on a better tomorrow.
Yeah, no, Steve, that is excellently put. And, on the whole storytelling front, when I looked at implementing Zscaler, I really kind of took a step back, and I was like, what is it that I'm providing to the organization? And, I knew what my mission was. We had to have that attestable reduction of organizational risk, both business and customer, and, the whole notion behind flattening the total cost of controls and then maximizing the user experience for profitability, right? So, and like you said, minimizing that friction. And the way that I always looked at it with, especially with Zscaler, when we were actually moving to, a lot more cloud delivered services. So we were going through a modicum of application transformation, I looked at it like, okay, ideally we'd like to, let's focus more on the, lowering the level of risk. And that's where I always kind of focused on more, doing more preventive type control implementation as opposed to detective or responsive. And then moving that cost into a lower, frame was, focusing more on automation and freeing up resources to do other things. And then of course, the piece of that was whenever we got to a level where something was so preventive that it was, impacting the way, in my case, was impacting lawyer productivity or client service, then we needed to focus more on the detective and responsive based control implementations. And with Zscaler, we had a nice blend of all of those, specifically on Zscaler Internet Access, to really kind of facilitate not only our application transformation, but also moving security closer to the user and really managing risk through visibility and then the implementation of those control types. So yeah, I kind of told a lot of different anecdotes around that. And it helped me a lot, especially when talking to, an organization that doesn't necessarily have a board, but, is managed by a bunch of senior partners who are all lawyers and can out talk you any day of the week. So Yeah. So moving, our discussion along, we discussed, our thoughts on the zero trust paradigm and how we see that working in our operational environment. Let's now, focus a little bit more and stay on topic with the overall session. But it seems that we see a high profile breach or catastrophic security incident that just reminds us again of the volatility of the threat landscape. Again, one of the things, and I think we're going to move into this with this session, but one of the things I really liked with Zscaler and other, cloud delivered services is that it opens up a lot of AI and ML capabilities, right? Now with Zscaler specifically, obviously that meant better threat prevention for, a globally distributed workforce. What are some strategies that you both have put into place for advanced threat protection for your respective organizations?
Go ahead,
So,
Steve.
yeah, I was going to say, so in my mind, it still kind of comes down to some of the same paradigms, right? Of defense in depth. You're never going to have some golden one trick thing that does it all and protects you from every single thing that's out there. So you can't do away with some of the traditional tried and true methodologies. But I do think a large part of this comes down towards how do we invite the user into that journey with us? Not inflicting security as a new means of their doing business, but really actually understanding how they do business and to the extent possible, making security invisible. And I think that's one of the paradigm shifts we have to start going down is stop telling people like, you've all seen the college campuses or business parks where here's a sidewalk that goes way out here and then way over here. And then there's grass. And inevitably, it's like follow the user where they want to go. And I think that's the biggest thing that we as a security community really owe our users or our business, depending on how you want to look at it, is follow them and just wrap that in security. Make sure what they do is secure without really them knowing. That, I think, is the trick. I don't think there's really an answer to that, but in terms of the coaching, the education, the awareness, getting people on both sides to understand what's needed, that's going to be kind of the best solution in my mind. The other part of this is truly the automation. There's, if you look at how fast these threats are moving, evolving, escaping, kind of moving laterally, whatever your favorite terminology is, they are quick and there's no way a human is going to keep up with them. So making sure your systems talk to systems that you can react basically real time or near real time to an event requires that you have intelligence, requires that you have that fact and visibility, and that you've invested in the automation, both from a scripting, but also kind of the partners talking to other partners. How do I make sure when I select the next vendor to join my cadre of tools, that it's not just a hammer that's off on its own that has no other intention of talking to something else. I have to have a connected ecosystem. I need partners who are willing to open up their APIs, who are actually excited and engaged in the marketplace, who are going to help me kind of move at wire speed across the various tools and things that I need within whatever my business is. And I think that's the other part, is just from an industry advocacy part, making sure people aren't trying to create the best thing just for them. Get rid of the silos. We've got to start thinking like the bad guys. Again, kind of going back to that paradigm of good guys need to be better at talking together.
Yeah, I think that's fantastic and spot on. One of the things that I always look for is interoperability, right? I mean, how well does a particular solution operate with the existing technology solutions I have in my environment? And it's vitally important that you at least are able to exchange information across platforms. When you start talking about AI and ML, one of the things that AI and ML is really good at when you have large data sets is anomaly detection. When you have a vast user population and you essentially are able to map out how individual users, entities, etc., are functioning within your environment, and you can create a norm. When something goes outside of that norm, it's very easy for an AI platform to go, that looks weird. They're not always right, but they can at least they can pick out stuff that looks a little bit funny. The longer that you play normal activities against that model, the better it is at anomaly detection. And that's, going back to understanding how our users work and understanding what they need to do and how they're doing it. Using AI and ML for, again, UEBA is a bit of a buzzword, but it's a truism that is an excellent way to discover risky behavior in your environment. Now, it's not always, you can't depend upon, we all know you can't depend upon signature-based stuff, right? Because a lot of attacks nowadays are using commonplace tools that already exist in your environment, right? So your antivirus is going to go, yep, that's fine. That's nothing wrong with that, but the way that it's being actually used is malicious. So I think that understanding how our users are functioning is extremely important for anomaly detection. But I also think that understanding how our users are working and are functioning allows us to actually adapt our environment to make those users work better and faster. If we see that a user is doing something, something weird, like, geez, I've never seen this before. Somebody connecting to VPN and then connecting to the Citrix farm and then connecting to, I mean, just doing something that's really hinky. You wouldn't probably notice that in a normal day, right? But if you have a way to actually model normal behavior or desired behavior for a particular user in a particular business process, again, if you're monitoring that user's behavior, you can push that up to the top and say, this doesn't look like it. This doesn't match the model of how we expect a user to function in this environment. And you can then investigate to determine if, it's just a user education thing, or if this guy can't get his job done the way that you would normally expect it because of X, Y, or Z. So I'm very eager to understand, to hear more about how we're actually, Zscaler is going to be leveraging AI and ML across the solution, because they're not looking at just, one company's users' behavior and traffic patterns. They're looking at more than a few different companies' users' behavior and traffic patterns. Now, you're going to see different behavior based off of different companies, right? For sure. There's no question, right? But you're going to see, you're going to have a very rich data set of normal user behavior to model against. And again, the richer your data, the better your results. So I think that we have a ways to go as far as being able to model users and being able to understand the correct behavior and being able to alert against those. But I think it's coming along pretty nicely. And when we look at what's going on within our environment, I'd love to get to and this is part of that zero trust model as well. I'd love to get to the point where we're not just seeing, behavior that's going out. We're not just seeing behavior that's going to SaaS applications or internet-based behavior. But again, treating every one of those entities as an independent entity, as an untrusted device that has to go through a trusted connection to be able to access internal resources, and you can then get much more rich data out of your user environment and model against that.
Yeah. All great points too, and it got me thinking too about the way that we were implemented, where essentially we have Zscaler in there, cloud delivered secure web gateway, and then also we were using a cloud delivered endpoint protection platform too. And yeah, I mean, you got to think, I mean, you can do a fair amount of crowdsourcing, all that anonymized customer data. Yeah. So yeah, that's exactly who we were using as well. But I mean, I love the notion, Ken, of the whole anomaly detection with user behavior. But also too, you mentioned something that really resonated with me is I think a lot of solution providers out there do a great job of stopping what I would call the known bad, right? With signature-based detection and similar techniques. But what about the unknown bad, right? That's where I really have always had a keen interest in how security providers in these cloud delivered spaces are leveraging and harnessing some of the capabilities of AI and ML and their massive data sets to, help provide customers that next level of protection, right? So I think that that's going to be really fascinating to watch, that space grow. And then both of you mentioned, leveraging AI and ML to improve that customer experience. And it got me thinking, like, what would be some great things there? Like maybe, like automated policy recommendations or, proactively detecting cloud issues or, with our, SaaS systems of record. I think that these are really interesting spaces to kind of watch and see what developments are going to be made, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think looking at it just purely from that consumerization of technology that played back when iPhone and iPad started kind of disrupting things a little bit, you'll see the same thing with SaaS, where people are now very used to in their personal lives interacting with technology one way, but when they go into their business world, it's very different. And I think to a large extent that's got to flatten out, because while we can train models all day long to spot those anomalies, and that's absolutely an essential part, the best person at spotting anomalies is a human. That's what we're incredibly good at. We can train a machine all day long, but frankly, why would I want to make my user's journey different? I mean, one of the things that Ken touched on earlier was kind of the idea of, I don't care if a person's in the office, at their house, at a hotel, halfway across the world, doesn't matter. I would ultimately want them to have the same journey, the same friction, if you will, regardless, because then they're used to it. And when people are used to it, they will notice when something's wrong. And that something being wrong is really what we want people to harness in on. I want them to pick up the phone at that point. I want them to ring a trouble ticket. I want them to do something because I've made their world different. I suddenly have, a red berry hanging on a bush where there never used to be one before. Why is that? And people are good at calling those things out. But if they're constantly bombarded with different signals, right, different approaches, different tech, there's no way they're keeping up with that.
That's right, and their experience changes, moment to moment practically. So, they've got one experience in the office, they got one experience at home, they got a different experience on mobile. It's just that you're absolutely right. Trying to level that experience and give them, a constant UX. It's challenging though. I mean, because you're dealing with multiple different platforms and connectivity paths and different technologies and how you're doing things and et cetera. But that's one of the beauties of getting to that true zero trust model, where no matter where you are, the connectivity is the exact same way. It's handled the same way. It looks the same way. It feels the same way, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah, great points, both of you. So let's start to begin to wrap up this part of the section. I think we've had a great dialogue that maps back to what the session detail were, and I appreciate both of your insights and experiences on all the topics that we've talked to. But as we kind of finish up this session, we did talk a little bit about some of the AI and machine learning capabilities that Zscaler is leveraging.